Welcome to the Fit to Lead podcast, where we explore the skills, strategies, and mindsets shaping the leaders of tomorrow. My name is Stephanie Guganik. I'm a project manager in international innovative projects at Beschulungscenter GmbH, and I have the honor to accompany you through today's podcast episode. Today, we are talking about creating barrier-free learning environments and why accessible education matters more than ever. From physical spaces to digital platforms, creating accessible education and training is not just a technical issue, but a human rights one. For people with disabilities, traditional learning spaces and materials can be full of obstacles. But what if you could design education that works for everyone from the start? To help us unpack this, I'm joined by Carmen Schrotter-Stadlauer from the Technical University of Graz. She has been working in the Accessible Working Service Center for 5 years now, supporting students and teaching staff. So, before we dive into the topic, can you tell us a bit about your background and what brought you to this work?
Yeah, hi, thank you. I'm happy to be here as well. I'm a psychologist and have been working at TU Graz for 5 years now. And my motivation to work here is to help students achieve an inclusive education. And this topic is important to me because I want everyone to have the same opportunity and chance to access education.
Thanks for sharing that. I think it's always interesting to hear what drives someone's passion for this work. So to get started, what does a barrier-free learning environment mean to you and why is it important?
A barrier-free learning environment means, to me personally, a space where everyone and every human being, regardless of their physical abilities, mental health, social background or language, have equal access to education and the same chance to participate. And it's not just about physical access like ramps or elevators. It also includes digital accessibility, clear and inclusive communication, flexible teaching methods, and an open, inclusive mindset from both teachers and students. And I think it's really important because education is a basic human right and always should be. And true equality only exists when everyone can fully take part and reach their potential. And when learning environments are designed to include everyone, diversity becomes a real strength. And I really believe in that. And that helps not only individuals grow, but also brings people together as a community.
That's a very powerful way to frame it. But even with the growing awareness, accessibility is still a major challenge. So, you touched it now, but why is accessibility in education such a critical issue today, especially for learners with disabilities?
I think accessibility in education is more important than ever today, especially for people with disabilities, of course, because it directly affects the right to equal participation, opportunity, and personal development. And in today's world, where everything is becoming more digital and knowledge-based, education is key to being independent, finding work and employment, and being part of society. And without accessible learning environments, students with disabilities are systematically excluded or disadvantaged. And that's something we all really need to internalize. And I think the problem is that a lot of education and many educational systems and materials in Austria and also in most parts of the world are still designed with a one-size-fits-all approach, which often ignores the diverse needs of learners, and that it just doesn't work for everyone. And this can lead to poor learning outcomes, lower self-esteem, and limited future opportunities for students with disabilities. And now that diversity and inclusion are becoming bigger priorities in society, it was about time. It's even more urgent to break down barriers, whether they're physical, digital, or just based on attitudes. And ensuring accessibility is not just a legal or moral obligation. For me, it's not just about ticking a box or meeting legal requirements. It's a matter of social justice and fairness. And the great thing is when we make education accessible, it doesn't just help those with disabilities, it improves the learning experience for everyone. And it promotes empathy, innovation, and a richer learning experience for all. And yeah, there's still a long way to go, but I think we're on the right track.
Mm-hmm. Let's get a bit more specific. In your experience, what are some of the most common challenges learners with disabilities still face in education or training settings?
In general, yes, there are still quite a lot of challenges in education and training environments. And one of the biggest issues, of course, is physical accessibility. Some buildings or classrooms still don't have ramps, elevators, or accessible restrooms, which can make it really difficult or maybe impossible for students with mobility impairments to participate fully. And another common barrier is the lack of assistive technology. Tools like screen readers, speech-to-text software, or adapted keyboards are essential for many students, but they're not often available or supported. And learning materials can also be a problem. A lot of textbooks or digital content aren't provided in accessible formats like braille, large print, audio, or captioned videos, so students with disabilities may not get the same access to information as others. Support services are another area where there are gaps. Things like sign language interpreters, note takers, or specialized tutors aren't always available, which make it harder for students to keep up. I mean, here at the TU Graz, we provide these kind of support services. And then there's the issue of attitudes and a lack of awareness. Some teachers, staff, or classmates may not fully understand what it means to be inclusive. Sometimes they are unconscious biases or low expectations that can make students feel excluded or unsupported. And also teaching methods are often not flexible enough. Traditional approaches don't work for everyone, and without personalized and adaptive strategies, students with disabilities may struggle to engage. And finally, there are administrative challenges. Long, complicated processes to get accommodations, poor communication, and a lack of coordination between services can all add extra stress. So overall, I would say addressing these issues really requires systematic change. And that means more inclusive policies, better training for educators, and a strong commitment to equity across the board. And we at the Service Center Barrier-Free Studying, we are aware of these barriers and we work on them.
So knowing that these barriers exist and you have to actually tackle it, what are practical steps that educators or institutions can take to begin making the learning experiences, materials more accessible?
Well, there are several practical steps to make the learning materials more accessible for all students. And one of the simplest but most effective thing is to use a clear, plain language. Avoiding jargon and explaining complex terms can make a big difference. It also helps to keep formatting consistent and organized, both in documents and presentations. Another big step is offering materials in multiple formats. That means providing text in large print, audio, braille, or screen reader-friendly versions. And videos should always include captions and transcripts, and images should have text so screen readers can describe them. It's also really important to ask for feedback directly from the students. What works for one person may not work for another, as I mentioned before. So inviting input and making adjustments based on their need is the key. And teachers and educators also need a good training. They should keep learning about inclusive teaching, how to use tools for accessibility, and how to make good digital content. For example, they can try tools like screen reader simulations or accessibility checkers in Word or PowerPoint. And these tools can help them see how students with disabilities use and understand the content. And at our university, we offer courses on PowerPoint and Word that teach how to make documents with fewer barriers so more people can use them easily. And last but not least, the most important thing or step is flexibility. Allowing different submission formats, communication styles, or pacing options gives students more space to succeed. And the most important thing for me personally, not just for accessible learning materials, but for barrier-free learning environment or inclusion general, is building a culture of openness where students feel safe to talk about their needs and problems. It is just as crucial as the technical aspects of accessibility. No, it is, in my opinion, the most crucial thing. And I always tell our teachers and educators about this and say this is the most important thing. Educators should explicitly state that they are available to listen and support students and should encourage students to speak up about their needs. And we know from different studies that creating psychological safety has a big impact on learning and even beyond that. And even small changes in these areas can help create a much more inclusive and supportive learning environment.
So when we talk about making the things more accessible, as you mentioned, it's not just about adding features, but it's all about the thoughtful design. It's about involving different people with disabilities to get their input as well, but also involving teachers to listen to their different students, what is very important as well. If we go to a higher state, are there any design principles or guidelines that educators should follow when creating inclusive content?
And yes, there are some key design principles and guidelines that educators should definitely be aware of. Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, is a great framework for inclusive teaching. It encourages flexible ways of presenting content, engaging students, and assessing learning. And for digital content, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG, are the gold standard. And on the top of that, using a plain language, designing for compatibility with assistive technologies, and following good visual design practices can help make content more usable for everyone. And following these principles leads to content that's more accessible, more engaging, and more respectful of the diverse needs of all learners.
So you mentioned that you're involving students in designing educational resources, or you mentioned the importance of involving the students in designing educational resources. How do you usually do that?
I think it's absolutely essential to involve students with disabilities, and not just important. They bring real life experience to the table, and that kind of insight is something you just can fully get if you don't have that perspective yourself. For one, it makes sure that the materials are actually relevant to their everyday lives. And people with disabilities know best what works for them and what doesn't. So it helps avoid assumptions that might miss the mark. And it's really valuable for identifying barriers early on. Things like confusing layouts, inaccessible formats, or unclear language. And if you catch those issues before the resources are widely used, you save time and frustration, of course. Plus, it shows that inclusion isn't just an afterthought. When people with disabilities are involved from the start, accessibility becomes part of the whole process, not just something that's added at the end. And honestly, it improves the quality for everyone. Things like a clear structure, flexible formats, or using plain language, they help all learners, not just those with disabilities. So, in short, if we want education to be truly accessible and inclusive, people with disabilities shouldn't just be users of these resources, they should be co-creators.
Well, thank you very much. I think it's a very important topic that you raised and articulated here. We were talking a lot about the theory, but theory is one thing. Seeing the real impact makes it more tangible. So can you share a real world example where accessible education made a clear impact?
Sure. We support students with a wide range of health conditions and disabilities, and part of that is making adaptations to both courses and exams. For example, we had a student with social anxiety who wasn't able to take part in group exercises during class. And in that case, we organized an alternative assignment so he could still complete the course requirements in a way that worked for him. The same goes for exams. Instead of writing them in crowded lecture hall, he was able to take his exams in a quiet room alone with few distractions. These kinds of adaptations made a huge difference for him, and without that support, he probably wouldn't have been able to continue his studies at that time. And it's a good example how relatively small adjustments can remove big barriers and make education possible for students who might otherwise be excluded.
That's a great example. And beyond the direct benefits, accessibility often has ripple effects. How can accessible education shift perceptions, not just for people with disabilities, but for the broader learning community?
I think accessible education has a huge impact, not just for people with disabilities, but for everyone in the learning community. Accessibility education has the power to shift perceptions in deep and lasting ways. First, it helps normalize diversity in learning. When education is built to include different needs from the start, it shows that there's no single right way to learn. Everyone learns differently, and that's just a part of being human. And this helps all learners recognize that flexibility, adaptation, and difference are normal, not exceptions. It also builds empathy and inclusion. When students see that accessibility is part of the environment, they are more likely to develop an understanding and respect for others who might face different challenges. It fosters a culture of support rather than competition or judgment. And another important point is that challenges stereotypes. When students with disabilities have the chance to succeed on equal terms, it breaks down outdated ideas about what they can or can't do. And honestly, accessible education often leads to innovation. Things like interactive tools, multimedia resources, or flexible assignments don't just help students with disabilities, they improve the experience for everyone, as I mentioned it many times before. Plus, it sends a strong message that equity matters. It shows that education isn't just about performance, it's about making sure everyone has a fair chance to take part and succeed. And finally, accessibility benefits more people than we usually think. It helps students learning in a second language, those dealing with anxiety, a temporary injuries, or anyone coming from a different educational background. And in this way, accessible education becomes a universal tool for empowerment, not a niche concern. So overall, it's about shifting from exclusion to inclusion, from focusing on limitations to recognizing potential. And in the end, accessible education makes learning better for everyone, not just for a few.
Thank you very much, Carmen, for joining us and sharing your experiences in regard to how to create barrier-free learning environments. I think we got a lot of very useful and insightful input from your side. And today's conversation reminds us that accessibility isn't just a bonus feature, it's a baseline. So if you're an educator, trainer, or just someone who cares about equity in learning, we hope you got inspired to take one action this week to make your learning environment more inclusive. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.